That night, as everyone raised their glasses, my mother-in-law stretched out her hand to show off the diamond necklace while I got a damp envelope with the words, "Trust no one at this table. The key is in your coat pocket." And I turned the entire dinner into my own personal courtroom. The crystal chandelier cast shadows across Margaret's smug face as she clasped the Rose Regent rubies around her neck. My husband squeezed my knee under the table, a warning or an apology. I couldn't tell. The envelope's edges were still wet with what smelled like nervous sweat, and when I slipped my hand into my coat pocket, cold metal met my fingertips. My name is Evelyn Hart Archer, though everyone calls me Evie, and I've learned that family dinners at the Archer house are performances where everyone knows their role except me. That Sunday evening in late October, the dining room smelled of rosemary lamb and furniture polish, the kind of aggressive cleanliness that Margaret, my mother-in-law, wielded like a weapon. The cream-colored tablecloth stretched across the mahogany table without a single wrinkle, and the heirloom silver that came out for what Margaret called occasions of significance, gleamed under the chandelier's calculated light. I sat in my designated chair, third from the head of the table, watching Margaret orchestrate the evening like a conductor with an invisible baton. My husband Liam fidgeted beside me, straightening his napkin for the fourth time. Across from us, Margaret's sister Patricia clutched her wine glass like a lifeline, and her husband Donald checked his phone under the table, probably calculating how soon he could escape to his study. "Family," Margaret began, tapping her sterling silver fork against her crystal glass at exactly 7:30 p.m. "Tonight marks a special tradition in the Archer household." She stood, her navy dress impeccable, her silver hair twisted into what she called her evening chignon. The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, Victor's clock, the one he'd wound every Sunday before his heart gave out 6 months ago. As you know, Victor left specific instructions for the distribution of certain family treasures. Margaret's voice carried that particular tone of false warmth she'd perfected over 40 years of country club luncheons. "Tonight, we honor his wishes." She reached for the velvet box beside her plate, and I noticed her hands trembled slightly. Excitement, not nerves. The box opened with a theatrical snap, revealing the Rose Regent collection, a necklace, earrings, and bracelet of Burmese rubies surrounded by diamonds, supposedly worth more than our house. "These pieces," Margaret said, lifting the necklace to catch the light, "have been in the Archer family for 3 generations. They represent continuity, tradition, and the preservation of our family's standing." She clasped them around her neck with practiced ease. "Victor wanted them to remain with someone who understands their true value, not merely monetary, but symbolic." Patricia murmured something appropriately envious. Donald's phone buzzed. Liam's hand found mine under the table, squeezing too hard. "And for you, Evelyn," Margaret continued, her smile sharp as the carving knife, "Victor left something personal." She slid a manila envelope across the table. It was damp at the corners, as if someone had been holding it with sweaty palms. My name was written across the front in Victor's shaky handwriting, the way it looked after his first stroke, when he had to relearn to hold a pen. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words pressed hard enough to indent the page, "Don't trust anyone at this table. Find locker 47 Riverside Storage. The combination is our wedding date. The key is in your coat pocket." My breath caught. Our wedding date, not his and Margaret's, but mine and Liam's. I felt the room tilt slightly as I reached for my coat hanging on the chair behind me, slipping my hand into the pocket Margaret had insisted I check for tissues earlier. There, it was a small brass key, wrapped in what felt like wax paper. "What does it say, dear?" Margaret asked, the rubies at her throat catching the light like drops of blood. I folded the letter carefully. My compliance training kicking in, never reveal information until you understand its value. "Just some personal advice about marriage," I said, managing what I hoped was a touched smile. "Very sweet." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew Victor better than that sweet wasn't in his vocabulary. But before she could probe further, Patricia launched into a story about her daughter's engagement, and the moment passed. I slipped the key into my shoe during dessert, pressing it against the insole where it bit into my arch with every step. As Margaret held court, displaying the rubies from different angles, explaining their provenance with the authority of someone who'd already mentally pawned them and bought them back, I thought about Victor's last words to me at the hospital. The real treasure isn't what glitters, Evie. Remember that. The evening wound down with coffee and Margaret's traditional dismissal disguised as hospitality. You must be exhausted, Evelyn, that commute from downtown, and with your demanding job. The emphasis on demanding suggested something unseemly about a woman who worked in financial compliance. As Liam and I gathered our coats, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Behind me, the rubies glowed against Margaret's neck like a collar of frozen fire. She'd won this round, or thought she had. If you get the sparkles, I whispered to my reflection, I'll take the power. The key pressed against my foot with every step toward the door, a small, sharp promise of whatever Victor had hidden away. Outside, the October wind stripped the last leaves from the oak trees, and I wondered what other things were about to be laid bare. The drive home from Archer House took 40 minutes through the winding roads of Redfield, past the shuttered steel mills and new tech complexes that marked our town's uneasy transition from past to future. Liam drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while I pressed my foot against the floor mat, feeling the key's outline through my shoe. I'd grown up 3 streets over from where the Archers built their fortress of limestone and propriety. Back then, Nora Briggs and I would bike past their gates, making up stories about the family inside. Now, Nora was a private investigator working out of a converted garage, and I was trapped inside those gates, bound by legal documents thicker than my arm. Mom means well, Liam finally said as we pulled into our driveway, a colonial that Margaret had gifted us with enough strings attached to puppet a Broadway show. Your mother means to control, I replied, exhausted by his eternal diplomacy. There's a difference. Inside, while Liam retreated to his study to decompress with whiskey and ESPN, I pulled out our wedding album not for nostalgia, but for evidence. Our wedding date, June 15th, 2019. 6-1-5-1-9. I memorized it like a safe combination, which I supposed it was. The wedding photos told their own story of power plays. Margaret in champagne beige that photographed wide enough to compete with my dress. The prenuptial agreement signing, staged like a celebration when it was actually a surrender Margaret's lawyer, a shark named Whitman from her country club, sliding papers across his mahogany desk while explaining how I'd have no claim to Archer family assets, no voting rights in family businesses, no say in legacy decisions. It's standard protection, he'd said, while Margaret nodded approvingly and Liam studied his shoes. I'd signed because I was 28 and in love and believed that love conquered legal documents. My compliance work should have taught me better papers always win. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m., unknown number, but the message was clear. Don't sign any amendments tonight. A friend. I screenshotted immediately, my investigator's instinct kicking in. In my line of work at Halcyon Mutual, anonymous tips usually meant someone was about to get burned. The timing was too specific tonight. Someone knew something was coming. I thought about Victor then. Really thought about him beyond the father-in-law role he'd played. He'd run Archer Design and Build for 30 years before his first stroke, built it from a small contractor service to a multi-million-dollar firm with government contracts and 3 state permits. But in his last 2 years, Margaret had systematically removed him from every position of power. For his health, she'd said, producing power of attorney documents and medical opinions from doctors who belonged to her tennis club. The prenup had been just the beginning. After the wedding, there were more papers amendments, addendums, clarifications, each one tightening the noose while Liam assured me it was just family business stuff, nothing important. But Victor had watched it all from his wheelchair, his eyes sharp even when his body failed. 3 months before he died, when Margaret was at her book club, Victor had wheeled himself into my home office. "She's moving the money," he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. "The real assets aren't what you see." "What do you mean?" I'd asked, but he'd just tapped his temple with one shaking finger. "The Rose Regent set is insured for $3 million, he'd said. "But check the actual policy. Check everything twice. You're the only one in this family who understands documents." Now I understood why he'd chosen our wedding date for the locker combination. It was the last decision about our lives that Margaret hadn't controlled. She'd picked the venue, the caterer, the flowers, even my dress designer. But she couldn't change the date we'd chosen before Liam had even proposed, back when we were just 2 kids planning a future without lawyers and amendments. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal investigation files encrypted and backed up offshore, a habit from handling whistleblower cases. I started a new folder, Archer Family Holdings. Then I began listing what I knew and what I suspected. Known, Margaret controlled voting shares in Archer Design and Build after Victor's incapacitation. The prenup locked me out of any claims. The Rose Regent rubies were the crown jewels of visible family wealth. Suspected Victor had hidden something in locker 47. The insurance values didn't match the stated worth. Someone was warning me about new documents coming. At 1:15, Liam stumbled to bed, mumbling about an early meeting. I waited until his breathing deepened into snores, then slipped the key from my shoe and held it up to the bedside lamp. It was old brass, unremarkable except for tiny numbers etched into the head, NMT, North Maple Trust. The name appeared in my mind like a file suddenly remembered. I'd seen those initials once, on a document Victor had been reading in the hospital, before Margaret had swept in and gathered all his papers, for safekeeping. Tomorrow, I'd visit locker 47. But tonight, I started my real work building a case, because in my world, documentation was ammunition, and I had the feeling I was about to need every bullet I could find. The Riverside storage facility sat between a defunct paper mill and a craft brewery that had tried to gentrify the wrong side of Redfield. At 7:20 a.m., the morning fog rolled off the Allegheny River like a curtain, and I stood before Unit 47 with my heart hammering against my ribs. The combination lock was rusted but functional. 6, 1, 5, 1, 9. It opened with a click that echoed in the empty corridor. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered over a space no bigger than a closet. Victor had left 3 items on a metal shelf, a USB drive wrapped in plastic, a leather journal with his initials embossed in gold, and a manila folder marked Insurance Documentation, Rose Regent Collection. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust except for fingerprints on the folder's edge. Someone had been here recently, but hadn't taken anything. I photographed everything before touching it, another habit from work. The USB drive went straight into my pocket. The journal fell open to a page dated 18 months ago. Victor's handwriting steadier than in his final letter. Margaret transferred $2 million from the building company to Maple Crest Interiors, a shell company registered in Delaware. Her cousin Diane is listed as owner, but Diane has been in assisted living for 3 years. Board never approved. She forged my signature during my recovery. The entries went back 5 years, each one documenting financial maneuvers that Margaret had hidden behind family dinners and charity galas. Victor had been building a case from his wheelchair, gathering evidence while everyone thought he was fading away. The insurance folder was the real revelation. The Rose Regent rubies were insured for $3 million, as Victor had said, but there were 2 policies, one from 2018 showing the full value, and another from 2021, after Victor's first stroke, listing the value at $300,000. The signature on the second policy was Margaret's, and the reason for the reduction was listed as adjusted per independent appraisal. Paper clipped to the back was a receipt from Harriman Jewelers, dated 6 months ago. Synthetic ruby creation and setting, Rose Regent replica set, total $45,000. My hands shook as I flipped to the final document, a certified copy of something called the North Maple Trust, established by Victor 2 years ago. The language was dense, but my compliance training helped me parse it. Victor had created a living trust with a poison pill provision. If any beneficiary of his will engaged in fraud, coercion, or undue influence regarding estate distribution, their inheritance would be voided, and 28% of Archer Design and Build would automatically transfer to a secondary beneficiary, Evelyn Hart Archer. The trust protector was listed as Elias North, with succession rights passing to Janice Lowell at Ashen Rowan LLP. I knew that firm. They handled corporate whistleblower cases, the kind where executives went to prison. My phone vibrated. Nora calling at 7:45 a.m., which meant she'd been up all night working a case. "Evie, you need to see something. Can you meet me at the old coffee shop on Market, 20 minutes later?" I sat across from Nora in a booth that had absorbed 30 years of cigarette smoke before the ban. She looked exhausted but wired, her red hair pulled into a messy bun, laptop open between us. "You asked me 6 months ago to keep an eye on Archer family finances," she said without preamble. "I've been tracking public records, property transfers, business filings. Look at this." Her screen showed a web of corporate entities, all leading back to Margaret. Maple Crest Interiors connected to Riverside Holdings, which owned Archer Family Investments, which had been slowly siphoning money from the construction company. "She's bleeding it dry," Nora said. "Moving assets before she forces everyone to sign off on the estate distribution," I finished. "She's going to make it look like there's nothing left to inherit except the rubies." "Which are fake." I showed her the insurance documents. Nora whistled low. She replaced them and pocketed the difference. "That's fraud, insurance fraud specifically. She could do time for this. Only if we can prove it." I plugged the USB into Nora's laptop, bypassing her security warnings. The drive contained hundreds of files, emails between Margaret and her accountant discussing asset restructuring, bank statements showing the transfers Victor had documented, and audio files labeled by date. I clicked on one from 3 months before Victor died. His voice filled the coffee shop, weak but clear. "This is Victor Archer. I am of sound mind, despite what my wife claims. I am recording this as evidence that Margaret Archer has systematically defrauded our family company and falsified insurance claims. If something happens to me, investigate the Rose Regent collection. The real stones are probably in a safety deposit box at First National, Box 212. I've given Evie the tools to stop this, though she doesn't know it yet." Nora closed her laptop. "Holy shit. Evie, you're holding a nuclear bomb." "I'm holding leverage," I corrected, thinking like the compliance officer I was. "The question is when to detonate it." My phone buzzed. Text from Liam. "Mom called emergency family meeting Friday. Says important documents to sign. Please don't make waves." I looked at Nora, then at the evidence spread between us. "Friday," I said. "That's when we make waves into tsunamis." I gathered everything back into my bag, except for one thing, a business card for Aidan Cole at Ashen Rowan LLP. Victor's backup plan. Time to activate the trust and turn Margaret's kingdom into my courtroom. "I need you to get this ruby collection independently appraised," I told Nora, sliding her the insurance documents. "Quietly. Use that gemologist who testified in the Brennan case." She grinned, the same wild smile from when we were kids planning midnight raids on the Archer Gardens. "You're going to war with the Queen." "No," I said, standing to leave. "I'm going to dethrone her with her own crown." Wednesday night's dinner at Archer House felt like walking into a trap with my eyes wide open. Margaret had pulled out all the stops, the good china, the 12-year-old wine. Even the chandelier was polished to a blinding gleam. But I noticed the lawyer's briefcase by the door, the way Patricia kept checking her phone, and how Margaret's smile never quite reached her eyes. "Evelyn, dear, you look tired," Margaret said, gesturing to my usual seat. "Perhaps you should consider reducing your hours at that compliance job. Family should come first." I set my phone to record, placing it screen down on the table. Pennsylvania's one-party consent law was beautiful that way. I find my work fulfilling. Margaret. Investigating financial irregularities. Uncovering fraud. It's fascinating how people think they can hide money trails. Her hand paused for a fraction of a second over her wine glass. How industrious of you. After the main course lamb again, because Margaret believed in traditions even when they choked you, she produced a document with the theatrical timing of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Now, as a family, she began, sliding copies toward each of us. We need to formalize certain arrangements regarding Victor's estate. This is simply an amendment to ensure smooth distribution and avoid any confusion. I read it slowly, my compliance training screaming at every line. It was a comprehensive waiver disguised as a family agreement, requiring all parties to accept the current distribution of assets and waive any right to challenge, audit, or investigate family holdings. In exchange, I would receive certain items of jewelry from the family collection to be determined by Margaret Archer as executor. This seems rather broad, I said mildly. Waiving audit rights. That's unusual for family documents. It's standard, Margaret said quickly. Our lawyer prepared it. She gestured to the briefcase by the door as if its presence validated everything. Which lawyer? I asked. Not Whitman, surely. He lost his license last month for ethics violations. The silence crystallized. Liam shifted beside me, his discomfort radiating like heat. Evie, please, just sign it. For family harmony. Family harmony, I repeated, looking directly at him. Is that what you call it when your mother asks me to sign away legal rights in exchange for unspecified jewelry that may or may not exist? The jewelry exists, Margaret snapped, her composure cracking. The Rose Regent is insured for $300,000, not $3 million, I interrupted. I'm curious about that dramatic depreciation. Did the rubies suddenly become less valuable, or did something else change? Patricia gasped. Donald actually looked up from his phone. Margaret's face went from pale to flushed in 2 seconds flat. How dare you question financial documents? It's literally my job. I pulled out my phone, stopping the recording and starting a new one, this time visibly. For the record, Margaret, are you stating that the Rose Regent collection in your possession is the original set, valued at $3 million? Of course it is. Then you won't mind if we have it independently appraised before anyone signs anything. That's not necessary. We have documentation from 2021, signed by you alone, listing a much lower value. Either you committed insurance fraud by undervaluing them, or they're not the original stones. Which is it? Liam grabbed my wrist. Evie, stop this! I turned to him, really looked at him for the first time in months. Your father left me a letter. Liam, do you want to know what it said, or do you already know? His grip loosened. What letter? The one warning me not to trust anyone at this table. The one that led me to evidence of systematic fraud, forged signatures, and stolen assets. I stood, gathering my unopened copy of the agreement. I won't be signing this. Margaret. In fact, I'll be requesting a formal audit of all family holdings, as is my right as a family member. You have no rights. Margaret stood too, her mask finally off. That prenup prevents me from claiming marital assets in a divorce. It says nothing about reporting financial crimes or activating trust provisions Victor put in place. I smiled, the same cold smile I'd learned from her. You taught me to always read the fine print. Remember, I pulled out Aiden Cole's business card and placed it on the table. My attorney will be in touch. Oh, and Margaret, you might want to check safety deposit box 212 at First National. I have a feeling what's in there doesn't match what's around your neck. The rubies at her throat caught the light as she stood frozen, processing the implications. Liam hadn't moved, torn between mother and wife, exactly where she'd trained him to be. If you pursue this, Margaret said quietly, dangerously, I will destroy you. Your reputation, your career, your marriage, my marriage. I laughed, bitter and free. You destroyed that the day you made him choose between us and he chose silence. I looked at Liam one last time. Your father knew what she was. He spent his last years gathering evidence. The only question now is whether you're complicit or just a coward. Patricia's wine glass shattered against the floor, breaking the spell. As I walked toward the door, Margaret called out, "You'll regret this. Evelyn." I turned back, my hand on the doorknob. The only thing I regret is not opening that locker sooner. Enjoy your rubies. Margaret. However long you get to keep them. Outside, the October air bit sharp and clean. My phone already showed 3 missed calls from Aiden, who'd received the package I'd sent earlier, copies of everything, with instructions to file with the trust protector if I didn't check in by 10 p.m. The game had moved from dinner table to courtroom, and I had documentary evidence for every play. Margaret had taught me well in the Archer family. Power mattered more than blood. She'd just never expected me to use her lessons against her. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that made Redfield look like a postcard, all golden leaves and false promises. The family council meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Archer House, and Margaret had summoned what she called the full contingent extended family, 2 board members from Archer Design and Build, and her new lawyer, a shark named Brennan who'd replaced the disgraced Whitman. I arrived at 1:45 p.m. Nora beside me with a leather portfolio and Aiden trailing with his briefcase. Margaret's face when she saw my entourage was worth the price of admission. "This is a family meeting," she said coldly from the doorway. "About family assets," I replied. "My advisors have every right to be present when financial matters are discussed." The dining room had been transformed into a boardroom, complete with printed agendas at each place setting. Margaret had positioned herself at the head, the Rose Regent rubies deliberately displayed against a black dress. The board members, Thompson and Reeves, both golf buddies of Victor's who'd shifted allegiance to Margaret after his death, sat to her right. Patricia and Donald flanked her left, with various cousins and in-laws filling the remaining seats. "Now then," Margaret began once everyone was settled, "as executor of Victor's estate, I've called this meeting to finalize the distribution of family assets and solidify our corporate structure going forward." She gestured to Brennan, who began distributing documents. "These agreements will ensure smooth transition and prevent any unnecessary complications." I let him place the papers in front of me, then spoke clearly for the room. "Before anyone signs anything, I'd like to address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the rubies around your neck. Margaret. Evelyn, this is neither the time nor— Actually, it's the perfect time." I nodded to Nora, who opened her portfolio and pulled out a document. "This is an independent appraisal of the Rose Regent collection, conducted 2 days ago by Dr. Marcus Webb, certified gemologist and expert witness in insurance fraud cases." Nora stood, distributing copies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this in courtrooms. "Dr. Webb's findings are quite interesting. The rubies currently in Mrs. Archer's possession are synthetic, created approximately 18 months ago. Beautiful work, worth about $45,000, but certainly not the $3 million original set." The room erupted. Thompson and Reeves exchanged alarmed looks. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Margaret's face cycled through pink to red to purple. "This is preposterous. Is it?" I pulled out the insurance documents. "Because you personally filed an amended insurance claim reducing the value from $3 million to $300,000. Either you knew they were fake, which is fraud, or you're grossly incompetent as executor. Which would you prefer to claim?" Brennan stood. "These accusations are slanderous. They're documented." Aiden interrupted smoothly. "We also have this." He produced a tablet, tapping play on an audio file. Victor's voice filled the room, weak but clear, describing the systematic fraud, the forged signatures, the shell companies. Margaret's hands gripped the table edge. That could be doctored. "Safety Deposit Box 212 at First National," I said quietly. Should we call the bank manager, ask what's been sitting there for the past 2 years? Because I'm betting it's either the real rubies or evidence of their sale. You had no right to. Actually, I had every right. Aiden stood now, commanding the room with courtroom presence. Mr. Victor Archer established the North Maple Trust with specific provisions. Upon evidence of fraud, coercion, or undue influence in estate distribution, voting shares transfer to the secondary beneficiary. Mrs. Hart Archer filed the activation documents yesterday. As of 9 a.m. this morning, she controls 28% of Archer Design and Build. The board members went pale. 28% was enough to demand forensic audits, to block major decisions, to call special votes. Furthermore, Aiden continued, we've documented systematic asset transfers to shell companies, unauthorized board actions, and potential embezzlement. The criminal investigation begins Monday. Criminal. Donald spoke for the first time, looking at his wife in horror. Patricia, did you know about this? Patricia shook her head mutely, staring at her sister like she'd never seen her before. I stood, gathering my papers. Here's what's going to happen. Margaret, you're going to resign as executor. You're going to return every penny you've siphoned from the company. And you're going to produce either the real rubies or proof of their legitimate sale. Or, her voice was barely a whisper, or I turn everything over to the district attorney. Insurance fraud, embezzlement, forgery at your age. That's effectively a life sentence. Liam hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, sat frozen between his mother and me like a statue. Finally, he spoke. Mom, is it true? The question hung in the air. Margaret looked at her son, her perfect boy who'd always chosen her side, and for the first time, she had no manipulation ready. I did it for the family, she said finally. To preserve what we built. You did it for control, I corrected. And now you've lost it. Thompson cleared his throat. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Margaret Archer as board chair. Seconded, Reeves said quickly, already calculating his distance from the sinking ship. The vote was swift, brutal, and unanimous except for Margaret's own vote. Even Liam raised his hand against her, though his eyes never left the table. I picked up the fake rubies appraisal, holding it up to the light. You know what the expert said was most interesting. The synthetic stones are actually more flawless than natural ones. Perfect, but worthless. Kind of like your entire facade. Margaret. As we left, Nora whispered, That was brutal. No, I said, glancing back at Margaret still frozen at the head of the table, her kingdom crumbling around her. That was justice. The brutal part comes Monday when the auditors arrive. The law offices of Ashen Rowan occupied the top floor of Redfield's only actual skyscraper, a 12-story testament to corporate ambition. At 8:30 a.m. Monday morning, I sat in a conference room with windows overlooking the river, watching barges push against the current while Aiden and Janice Lowell, the trust protector, reviewed the final documentation. Everything's in order, Janice said, her silver hair catching the morning light. She'd been Elias North's protégé, trained in the kind of meticulous legal work that could topple empires. The evidence package is comprehensive financial records, audio recordings, independent appraisals, documented patterns of coercion. The trust provisions are crystal clear. She slid a document across the polished table. This is the official activation notice. Once filed with the state and Archer Design and Build, your 28% ownership becomes irrevocable. Margaret can't challenge it without admitting to the fraud that triggered the transfer. I signed where indicated, my signature steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Each stroke of the pen was a nail in the coffin of Margaret's empire. The transfer will be recorded at 9 a.m. Precisely, Aiden said, checking his watch. We've already notified the company's registered agent. They're legally required to update the shareholder registry immediately. What about the other shareholders? I asked. The employees with stock options, the institutional investors. They've all been discreetly informed about the upcoming special meeting, Janice replied. Thompson and Reeves have been particularly cooperative. They're terrified of being implicated in Margaret's schemes. They're ready to vote with you. My phone buzzed with a text from Nora. Margaret just arrived at company headquarters. She's demanding to see the books. Let her, I said. The forensic accountants are already there. Aiden smiled, the kind of sharp grin that made opposing counsel nervous. Speaking of which, the FBI's white-collar crime division expressed interest after we shared the interstate commerce violations. Apparently, moving money across state lines to Delaware shell companies attracts federal attention. At 8:55 a.m., we gathered around the conference phone. Aiden dialed the number for Archer Design and Build's corporate secretary, putting it on speaker. Archer Design and Build, Office of Corporate Records. A nervous voice answered. This is Aiden Cole from Ashen Rowan, representing Evelyn Hart Archer. I'm calling to confirm receipt of the North Maple Trust transfer documentation filed this morning. Yes, Mr. Cole. We received it at 8:45 a.m. The share registry has been updated. Mrs. Hart Archer now holds 28% of voting shares, making her the second largest shareholder after Mrs. Margaret Archer's 31%. And the special shareholder meeting, scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m., as requested. Notices have been sent to all shareholders of record. Thank you. Please confirm that Mrs. Hart Archer has full access to all corporate records as required by law. Confirmed. Security has been notified to provide complete access. I leaned toward the phone. This is Evelyn Hart Archer. I'll be there within the hour to review the books. Please have the last 5 years of financial statements ready, particularly anything related to Maple Crest Interiors and Riverside Holdings. There was a pause. Then, Mrs. Archer. Mrs. Margaret Archer is currently in the building. She's quite upset about the access you've requested. She can be as upset as she likes, I said calmly. The law is clear. 28% ownership gives me inspection rights. If she interferes, call security. If security won't act, call the police. After we hung up, Janice pulled out another folder. There's one more thing. Victor left a sealed letter with the trust documents, to be opened only upon successful activation. He wanted you to have this. Inside was a handwritten note in Victor's steady pre-stroke penmanship. Evie, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't stood up to Margaret with the law as your weapon. The 28% isn't just about control, it's about truth. The real Rose Regent rubies were sold 3 years ago to cover Margaret's gambling debts from her Atlantic City charity weekends. The buyer was discreet, paid cash. She had the replicas made to maintain appearances. But here's what she doesn't know. I bought them back. The real set is in a safety deposit box at Citizens Bank in Pittsburgh. Box 417. The key is hidden in my study. Inside the first edition Hemingway, the one about the old man and the sea, because sometimes the biggest catches require the longest fights. Use the rubies as you see fit. Consider them combat pay for dealing with my family. Don't let her destroy Liam. He's weak, but not evil. He just never learned to fight his mother. Maybe you can teach him. Victor. I read it twice, then looked at Aiden and Janice. We're going to Pittsburgh this afternoon, but first, I have a company to audit and a mother-in-law to dethrone. Aiden started packing his briefcase. You realize she'll fight this with everything she has left. Let her, I said, standing and smoothing my suit, my best one. The power suit I wore for the biggest compliance investigations. She taught me that in the Archer family. Power is everything. She just never expected me to be such a good student. At 9:15 a.m., my phone exploded with calls from Liam, all going to voicemail. Then came Margaret's text. You've destroyed this family. I typed back, no, Margaret, I've audited it. There's a difference. The 28% was mine. The investigation was launched. The real rubies were waiting in Pittsburgh, and Margaret's house of cards was finally collapsing. Victor had been right. The real treasure wasn't what glittered. It was the power to reveal the truth. The boardroom at Archer Design and Build hadn't seen this much tension since Victor collapsed during a shareholders' meeting 3 years ago. Thursday at 10 a.m. sharp. I walked in wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to my first day at Halcyon Mutual, my armor for battles that mattered. Margaret sat at the head of the table, flanked by Brennan and two other lawyers she'd imported from Philadelphia. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, the fake rubies still around her neck like a defiant flag. The other shareholders filled the remaining seats, Thompson and Reeves looking uncomfortable, 3 institutional investors who'd flown in from New York, and a handful of employees with stock options who'd never attended a meeting before. Liam sat alone near the window, isolated from both camps. He'd been living at a hotel since Friday, sending texts I didn't read and leaving voicemails I didn't play. "This meeting is illegitimate," Margaret began before I could even sit. "The shares allegedly transferred were obtained through manipulation and point of order," Aiden interrupted smoothly. "Mrs. Hart Archer called this meeting pursuant to Section 12 of the corporate bylaws. She has the required 25% threshold. Your objections are noted but irrelevant." I stood, pulling out Nora's presentation materials. "Let's start with facts. In the past 5 years, $8.7 million has been transferred from Archer Design and Build to shell companies controlled by Margaret Archer." Nora clicked through slides on the wall screen, each one showing bank records, wire transfers, forged authorizations. The employee shareholders leaned forward, seeing their stock options evaporate in real time. Maple Crest Interiors received $2 million for consulting services never performed. Riverside Holdings billed $1.3 million for property management of buildings the company doesn't own. 3 more shells in Delaware. "These were legitimate business expenses," Brennan interjected. "Then you won't mind the forensic audit currently being conducted by Friedman and Associates." I replied, "They specialize in corporate fraud. Their preliminary report should be ready by Monday." One of the institutional investors, a woman named Carla Vance from Meridian Capital, raised her hand. "Mrs. Archer, did you authorize these transfers?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "All financial decisions were made in the company's best interest." "That's not what I asked. Did you personally authorize transfers to companies owned by your relatives?" The silence stretched until Thompson cleared his throat. "I move to discuss the motion on today's agenda vote of no confidence in CEO Margaret Archer and appointment of interim leadership." "Seconded," Reeves said quickly. "You can't," Margaret started, but I cut her off. "Actually, we can." I pulled out the analysis Aiden had prepared. Between my 28%, Meridian Capital's 15%, the 2 other institutional investors combined 12%, and Thompson and Reeves's combined 8%, we have 63% of voting shares, more than enough for any corporate action. "Including," Aiden added, "implementing new controls requiring dual authorization for any transfer over $10,000, full board approval for related party transactions, and quarterly third-party audits." Margaret stood, her composure finally cracking. "You're destroying 40 years of work Victor built this company." "Victor built it," I agreed, standing to face her. "You looted it. There's a difference." "How dare you! How dare I!" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "How dare you forge his signature while he was lying in a hospital bed? How dare you sell his mother's rubies to cover your gambling debts?" "Oh yes, Margaret, we know about Atlantic City. 500,000 in markers at the Borgata alone." Gasps rippled through the room. Liam's head snapped up, staring at his mother. "That's a lie." "It's documented." Nora pulled out credit card statements. "Casino records obtained through a private investigator contact. The timeline matches perfectly with the ruby sale. You needed quick cash, sold the stones, had replicas made, and filed false insurance claims to cover the switch." Carla Vance from Meridian stood. "I've heard enough. Meridian Capital votes in favor of the no confidence motion." One by one, the votes came in. Even the employees with tiny stakes raised their hands, watching their retirement funds circle the drain. When it came to Liam, the room held its breath. He looked at his mother, then at me, then at the evidence spread across the table. "I vote yes," he said quietly. Margaret's face went white. Liam, you can't. You lied to me too, Mom, about everything. His voice was steady but broken. Dad tried to warn me before he died, but I didn't want to hear it. I chose comfort over truth. But Evie's right, you destroyed this family long before she exposed it. The final tally was devastating, 91% in favor, only Margaret and her sister Patricia voting against. Motion carried, Thompson announced unnecessarily. Margaret Archer is removed as CEO effective immediately. The board further moves to appoint Evelyn Hart Archer as interim CEO pending a full search. Carla Vance added. Her financial compliance background makes her uniquely qualified to clean up this mess. I hadn't expected that, but I nodded acceptance. My first act will be cooperating fully with all investigations. My second will be recovering stolen assets. Margaret gathered her things with shaking hands. You think you've won, I'll sue you into, with what money? I asked calmly. Your personal accounts are frozen pending the investigation. Your credit cards were canceled this morning for non-payment. Even the house is mortgaged to the hilt, we have the records. She looked around the room for support and found none. Thompson and Reeves were studying their phones. The investors were already planning their exit strategies. Patricia was crying quietly into a handkerchief. This isn't over, Margaret hissed. Yes, it is. I pulled out the key to locker 47, the one that started everything, and set it on the table. Victor left me the key in more ways than one, and unlike you, I actually read the instructions. Security arrived to escort Margaret out standard procedure when someone was removed from a position with financial access. As she passed my chair, she leaned down and whispered, He never loved you. Neither does Liam. I looked up at her, this woman who'd tried to cage me with papers and prejudice, and smiled. Maybe not, but Victor trusted me, and in the end, that mattered more than love. The door closed behind her with institutional finality. The company was saved, the truth was exposed, and I sat in the CEO's chair not through marriage or manipulation, but through the simple act of keeping better records than the woman who'd tried to bury me in paperwork. The Monday after the vote, I arrived at Archer Design and Build at 6 a.m., before the sunrise painted the river gold. The executive office still smelled like Margaret's perfume. Chanel No. 5 applied like armor. I opened every window, letting the October air sweep it clean. By 7 a.m., the forensic accountants had set up in the conference room, their laptops and boxes of records transforming the space into a war room. Nora was already there, cross-referencing shell company registrations with payment authorizations. The real number is closer to 12 million, she said without looking up. She was smart about it, keeping each transfer under reporting thresholds, spreading them across fiscal years. But the pattern is clear. At 9 a.m., I convened an all-hands meeting. The entire staff gathered in the main floor, whispering nervously. Most had never seen me as anything but Liam's wife at company picnics. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, I began, standing on a makeshift platform of shipping crates. The company has been systematically drained for 5 years, but we're still solvent, still operational, and still have contracts worth $40 million in the pipeline. We can survive this if we're transparent, efficient, and unified. An engineer raised his hand. Are our jobs safe? If we recover the stolen assets and land the Morrison Industrial contract next month, yes. I'm not here to dismantle Victor's legacy. I'm here to restore it. The room shifted, fear morphing into determination. These people had built their careers here. They just needed someone to fight for them. At noon, Aiden called with news. The district attorney filed charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, insurance fraud. Margaret's looking at 15 to 20 years. And the assets, frozen and flagged for recovery. You'll get most of it back, eventually. That afternoon, I stood in Victor's old study at Archer House Mine now, since Margaret had fled to her sister's in Connecticut, and Liam had signed over his interest in exchange for a clean divorce. The first edition Hemingway was exactly where Victor said, "The old man and the sea holding one final secret." The safety deposit key was taped inside the back cover, along with a photo Victor and a young woman I didn't recognize, both laughing beside a half-built house. I turned it over. Written in faded ink, Victor and Evelyn, 1979. First Archer House. My namesake. Not Liam's grandmother, not Margaret's mother. Someone Victor had known before Margaret's aristocratic pretensions consumed him. Someone he'd remembered when he met me. Another Evelyn who might stand up to the empire his wife had corrupted. The real Rose Regent rubies were in Pittsburgh, exactly where Victor promised. The bank manager's eyes widened when I opened Box 417 $3 million in Burmese rubies, still in their original 1940s Cartier settings. But I didn't keep them. Instead, I had them appraised, certified, and put up for auction. The proceeds went into an employee trust fund, ensuring the people who'd actually built Archer Design and Build would benefit from its recovery. Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the coup, I sat in my new apartment downtown. I'd never returned to the house Margaret had gifted us with strings attached. Nora was sprawled on my couch, beer in hand, going through the final audit reports. Total recovery looks like $9.8 million, she said. Not bad for a month's work. It wasn't about the money, I said, though we both knew that was only partly true. My phone buzzed. Liam, again. This time I answered. Evie, His voice was raw, stripped of the polish Margaret had shellacked onto him. I'm sorry. For everything. For choosing her. For the prenup. For being too weak to see what she was. I know, I said. Because I did. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Could I earn it back? Eventually. I looked at the divorce papers on my coffee table, already signed by both parties. Maybe, but not as your wife. That person doesn't exist anymore. After I hung up, Nora raised her beer. To Victor, who played the long game from beyond the grave. To Margaret, I countered, who taught me that family is just another word for leverage. We clinked bottles and drank to the demolition of dynasties. 6 months later, Archer Design and Build posted its best quarter in a decade. The Morrison contract came through, the stolen funds were mostly recovered, and Margaret took a plea deal 7 years minimum, out in 5 with good behavior. The fake rubies ended up in an evidence locker, worthless stones that had once propped up an empire of lies. I stepped down as CEO once a suitable replacement was found, returning to compliance work with a reputation that had firms fighting to hire me. The woman who'd brought down Margaret Archer with a brass key and better bookkeeping. On the anniversary of Victor's death, I visited his grave with a single rose red as rubies, real as the truth he'd trusted me to reveal. His headstone read, "Beloved husband and father," but someone, maybe me, maybe Liam, maybe a ghost of conscience had added a small brass plaque below, "and honest man." I left the key from locker 47 on his grave, the little brass tooth that had unlocked an empire's jaw. The wind off the river was cold, carrying the smell of rain and redemption. You gave me the key, I told the stone and the man beneath it. But I chose which doors to open. Walking back through the cemetery, past the elaborate Archer family plot Margaret had designed for herself, I smiled. She'd wanted a dynasty of crystal and appearances. Instead, she got a cell and a cautionary tale about the woman who kept better records than the one trying to bury her. The key was gone, left with Victor. But the power it unlocked, that was mine to keep. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of family betrayal and sweet revenge resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done with Margaret's fake rubies? Let me know in the comments.